Hey guys, tonight is really a night. The air feels thick with the weight of history, and somewhere in the candle-lit corridors of the ancient Qin palace, a young boy in embroidered robes tries not to flinch at the sound of footsteps. The year is around 259 BCE. The place is Handan capital of the rival Zhao state, and you are here in the most unlikely role, a quiet witness to the making of a ruler whose cruelty will echo through centuries. You can almost smell the lacquered wood of the palace screens, hear the faint scrape of a scribe's brush, and feel the quiet tension that could at any moment explode into danger. You probably won't survive this, by the way, not if the court politics chew you up first. If you enjoy peaceful bedtime stories like this, please support our channel by subscribing and hitting the like button. Now get cozy, take a deep breath, and let tonight's gentle tale carry you into a wonderful, restful sleep. I'd also love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it where you are? Or maybe just share how you're feeling right now, what's on your mind. This is a safe space. Your thoughts and worries are welcome here, like little paper boats set afloat down a quiet stream. Close your eyes if you like. Feel your shoulders drop, and allow my voice to guide you into a calm, cozy world tonight. You find yourself in a childhood defined by danger. The boy known as Yingzheng is technically a prince of Qin, but he's being kept as a hostage in Zhao territory, a political insurance policy to keep Qin in line. Hostage life is not exactly the sort of carefree upbringing you'd hope for. Every feast, every game in the courtyard, every soft-spoken courtier who leans too close could be a potential threat. You walk with him through these stone-paved courtyards, noting the careful distance he keeps from others, the way his eyes dart to corners where assassins might hide. Historians still argue whether his early captivity hardened him or merely confirmed what he already sensed, that trust is a fragile luxury. Either way, you can feel him learning early that the world is divided into two kinds of people, those who might be useful to him and those who must be eliminated. You pass through the cold marble halls of Zhao's palace, and here's a quirky tidbit to amuse noble children. The court sometimes staged miniature war games with live crickets. You watch tiny battles fought in porcelain bowls, the children cheering as one insect pins another. It's all very charming until you realize this might be the only kind of safe combat the hostage prince will be allowed. Yet even in these trivial games, Yingzhen plays to win, and he rarely loses. Back in his private quarters, you see him study with a seriousness that unnerves the older tutors. He learns military strategy, statecraft, the poetry of past dynasties, but it's the legalist philosophy that seems to lodge deep in his mind. Law as absolute power, punishment as deterrence, order above all else. You feel a chill even in this warm-lit study chamber. Then comes the scandal with his mother. Lady Zhaoji, beautiful and politically savvy, has her own secrets. Rumors whisper through the corridors like autumn leaves in a draft. Her closeness with a certain merchant named Lu Buwei, perhaps even before Yingzheng's birth, and her later involvement with an unscrupulous lover who dabbles in rebellion. Historians still bicker over the details, but you can imagine the boy's embarrassment, the betrayal curling inside him like a sleeping snake. Sometimes at night he walks alone in the palace gardens, the moonlight breaking across the lotus ponds. You follow quietly as he stops near a weathered stone lion, tracing its cold surface with small, deliberate hands. Perhaps he's imagining himself as the lion, unblinking, impossible to move master of all it surveys. A passing breeze smells faintly of pine resin and ink, and for a moment the boy seems older than his years. One evening, the Zhao court decides to parade its hostage prince at a banquet for visiting dignitaries. He sits on a raised seat, back straight, not touching the delicacies in front of him. You notice a silver fish glinting under lamplight, a dish laced with enough poison to cripple a man. It is removed quietly after a nod from a watchful attendant. This is how survival works here, vigilance in every breath. Your feet ache from following him through the endless etiquette drills, bowing to this elder, avoiding that minister, keeping your words measured and your face unreadable. You find yourself learning the same lesson he does, that in such a place showing emotion is like drawing a target on your chest. The day news reaches the Zhao court that Qin's armies have crushed yet another rival state. The mood shifts. Yingzheng's value changes overnight. No longer just a bargaining chip, he is now a potential heir to a rising power. You watch courtiers who once ignored him offer polite smiles, small gifts, and veiled suggestions about future alliances. He accepts them with the blank courtesy of someone already imagining their eventual downfall. In these early years, you can almost see the layers of armor forming, not the kind forged in steel, but the invisible, unyielding kind made from suspicion calculation and the absolute certainty that only one person can be trusted himself. The boys' steps echo in the palace corridors as though each one is a promise to never again be powerless. The candlelight trembles against the lacquered beams above, casting shadows that look almost like grasping hands on the walls. You sense that this child hostage prince, future conqueror, will grow into those shadows and command them. Somewhere deep inside, you already know the cruelty is forming, like winter ice thickening beneath a still pond. The air in the Zhao capital grows colder with each passing winter, and you notice the boy's eyes narrowing whenever the name Qin is spoken. Word arrives that the king of Qin, his father, has died. In the confusion that follows, you imagine what it feels like to be a boy in enemy territory, hearing the news that should change your life completely, but realizing it might also make you the most dangerous piece on the chessboard. The Zhao court keeps him under watch, as if they've just discovered they were housing a wolf cub. Every movement is shadowed by guards, every conversation filtered through attendants. Yet somehow, as you follow him along the frosted garden paths, you catch hints of a new, taut energy in him. It's the kind of confidence that says, I will go home. I will rule. Historians still argue over the details of how he was released, but the likeliest story is a calculated political trade Qin, applying military pressure in exchange for their prince. When the day finally comes, you stand on the edge of the Zhao gates and watch a slim figure mount a horse. He doesn't look back, not once. You suspect it's because he has already left this place behind in his mind, and perhaps someday he will erase it in reality. The road home to Qin is long and bitterly cold. You ride in the convoy alongside him, the snow muffling the sound of hooves. Here's a quirky tidbit. Qin emissaries carried portable clay stoves to keep tea water hot on the road, the steam curling up like tiny dragons against the pale winter sky. Yingzheng accepts a cup, but drinks sparingly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. You have the distinct impression he's already planning which ministers to trust, which to remove, and which to bury under the floorboards figuratively for now. When he arrives in Xianyang, the Qin capital, it feels like stepping from the cramped rooms of a small house into the grand hall of a temple. The streets are lined with soldiers in lacquered armor banners snapping in the wind. The new king is only 13 years old, but he rides as if the saddle was made for him. The crowds cheer a roar of hope, fear, and curiosity, all rolled into one. You can almost smell the mix of horse sweat and pine tar from the towering gate timbers. Inside the palace, the real game begins. His regent Lu Bue, yes, the same wealthy merchant rumored to have had ties with his mother, takes the reins of government on the boy's behalf. But you notice Yingzheng rarely misses a council meeting. He sits quietly, fingers tapping the arm of his chair, memorizing every voice, every argument, every weakness. Historians still debate how much power he actually wielded in these years. But you can tell, he's not just observing, he's keeping score. The intrigues of the Qin court are thick enough to slice with a bronze dagger. Rival factions whisper in corners, and the region's allies treat the young king like a ceremonial vase, valuable, but not to be handled roughly. He plays along for now. And here's the strange part, he smiles sometimes. But you've learned enough by now to know that a smile in this palace can be as sharp as a blade. One afternoon, you follow him to the training fields. Rows of soldiers drill with halberds, their boots crunching in perfect unison. The king watches silently, then takes a bow from an attendant. Without a word, he draws and looses an arrow across the field, striking a distant straw target dead center. The soldiers cheer, whether out of genuine admiration or survival instinct, it's hard to tell. He lowers the bow with the faintest smirk. A performance perhaps, but also a warning. I am not just a child. There is tension in the evenings. You hear the shuffle of feet outside your quarters, the low voices of guards. Rumors swirl, a noble in the east plotting rebellion, a minister accused of treachery. In the shadows of the lantern-lit hall, you glimpse the king's mother speaking quietly with an unfamiliar man. You know enough now not to linger and listen. In Qin, curiosity isn't just dangerous, it's terminal. Here's a strange detail. The palace musicians have been playing fewer cheerful tunes lately, favoring slow, heavy pieces in the minor key. You wonder if they can feel the air tightening, as though the whole court is holding its breath. And maybe it is. The young king is growing sharpening. You've seen blades tempered in fire. He's being tempered in silence. Then comes the moment, not a public proclamation, not a thunderclap, but a subtle shift you can feel in your bones. Lu Buwei's voice carries less weight in council. The guards outside the king's chambers answer more directly to him than to the regent. A few troublesome nobles are quietly removed from their posts, replaced by men whose loyalty is unquestionable. You watch the web tightening. One evening, he walks alone to the high terrace above the palace gates. The city sprawls below lanterns dotting the dark like fallen stars. He stands there a long time, and you can almost hear his thoughts. All this will be mine to shape, to hold, to rule. The night wind tugs at his robes, and you feel the first true shiver of what's to come. By the time he is ready to seize the dragon throne entirely, the boy you first followed through the cold courtyards of Zhao is gone. In his place stands a young man whose patience has teeth, whose ambition has a pulse. You don't know it yet, but the cruelty is waiting just beneath his measured calm, like a great stone waiting for the sculptor's chisel. The campaigns begin almost quietly, like the low rumble of thunder far away. You're in the council chamber when the first plans are unrolled, maps inked in black and red, tiny wooden markers representing armies, supply routes, and strategic choke points. Yingzheng, no longer a boy, but still shy of manhood, leans over the table, his eyes tracing the borders of rival kingdoms like a cat studying prey. The goal is not simply to defend Qin, but to erase the warring states altogether. Historians still argue whether his ambition sprang from a genuine desire to unify China, or simply to secure power for himself. In truth, you suspect it's both. The Qin have been raised on the belief that they are destined to bring order to the fractured lands, and order in their lexicon is just another way of saying absolute control. The first targets are chosen carefully. Weaker neighbors already strained by years of war make tempting prey. You ride out with the vanguard through fields dusted with frost. The sound of boots on frozen ground becomes a drumbeat of inevitability. Qin generals, hard men in heavy lamella armor, bark commands with voices that carry for miles. Here's a quirky tidbit. Qin war horns were carved from massive ox horns polished to a sheen, producing a low, mournful call that could be heard across valleys. The sound feels less like music and more like the voice of doom rolling over the hills. As the campaign season unfolds, you begin to understand why the Qin war machine is so feared. Every soldier moves as if part of a single unbreakable chain. Supply lines stretch like iron threads across the countryside, and strict discipline keeps them taut. Disobey an order. That's not just a slap on the wrist, that's execution, sometimes on the spot. You can feel the cruelty of the system humming beneath the victories. In the conquered towns, Qin banners replace local standards overnight. The people are made to kneel in the marketplace, while new laws are read aloud. Some weep, some stare with empty eyes, and a few try to run. But the legalist doctrine offers no sympathy for hesitation. You watch soldiers cut down a man who dared to spit on the Qin emblem. The blood soaks into the cold earth before you can even take a step toward him. Between campaigns, Yingzheng returns to Shanyang, but his thoughts never seem to leave the battlefield. He holds court with generals whose armor still bears the mud of war, discussing troop movements and sieges over steaming bowls of millet porridge. You notice he has developed a habit of tracing the rims of his cup with one finger, as if sketching borders in his mind. One evening, as the council debates the siege of a particularly stubborn city, he interrupts a general mid-sentence. The room falls silent. He orders that the city be encircled, its water supply cut, and no mercy shown to any who resist. You see a flicker of hesitation in the general's eyes, but no one dares question him. Historians still debate whether this siege, which lasted months and ended with mass executions, was a calculated example or simply a cruel reflex. Either way, the message was received. Resistance to Qin rule is suicide. The years pass in this rhythm campaign conquest consolidation. Each victory tightens his grip on the land. The kingdom of Han falls first, then Zhao, the place that once held him hostage. You return there with him, walking through the same palace, where he once sat as a captive boy. Now he enters as a conqueror, his soldier's boots shaking the tiled floors. There's a faint smile on his lips, but you can't tell if it's satisfaction or simply habit. Here's another strange detail. After the fall of Zhao, he orders the palace archives searched and all records of his captivity quietly destroyed. You realize he is not only conquering lands, he is conquering memory itself. By the time the Yan and Wei kingdoms crumble, the pattern is unmistakable. Qin armies march in like a tide, swift and overwhelming, and when they recede, nothing of the old order remains. You can almost feel the land reshaping under your feet. The boundaries redrawn, the old allegiances erased. One spring morning, as the peach blossoms open along the Wei River, word arrives that only two great rivals remain, Chu and Qi. The court buzzes with excitement and tension. You know the outcome is inevitable, but the final strokes of the unification must still be painted in blood and fire. The campaigns against Chu are brutal, the terrain swampy, the enemy fierce, but the Qin advance grinds forward, like a millstone crushing grain. When Qi finally falls without much resistance, it feels less like a triumph, and more like the quiet closing of a door. There is no one left to challenge him. You stand beside him on the palace balcony as the banners of the last conquered state are brought to Shanyang. He watches them burn in the courtyard brazier, the smoke curling into the twilight. His voice is low, almost casual. Now there is only Qin. In that moment, you realize the unification of China is complete. It is the birth of an empire, yes, but also the birth of a rule so absolute, so unflinching, that mercy will soon be as rare as snow in midsummer. The empire is barely a few breaths old when you smell the first smoke of its rewriting. The streets of Xianyang are alive with celebration banners streaming from rooftops, the air spiced with roasting meats and sweet wine. Yet, in the shadow of this joy, orders are already being drafted that will change the soul of China. Yingzheng has taken a new title, Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. And with this title comes the conviction that to rule the future, you must first own the past. You're there in the great audience hall when the imperial edict is read. His voice, calm but implacable, declares that all books not aligned with Qin law and history must be destroyed. The scroll keepers look pale. The scholars murmur uneasily. He raises a hand for silence. The past, he says, is a chain on the future. The words fall into the hall like cold stones. Historians still argue whether this was purely ideological or also a calculated strike at dissent. You suspect it's both, with maybe a pinch of ego the size of Mount Tai. The process begins at once. Messengers carry orders to every province, and soon carts of bamboo scrolls and silk manuscripts roll into the capital. The city's air changes. It smells less of celebration now, more of oiled wood and ink, the last breaths of knowledge before it is smothered. Soldiers stack the confiscated works in the public square, the piles rising taller than a man. You run your fingers along a bundle of bound bamboo slips, feeling the carved characters under your skin, wondering what wisdom they hold that will never again be read. Then the torches come. A roar rises from the crowd, part awe, part fear, as flames lick upward, devouring the dry bamboo with a crackle like breaking bones. The smoke is thick, stinging your eyes. Somewhere in that choking haze, you hear a scholar sob. A soldier laughs under his breath. It feels like watching a forest burn, while knowing the seeds have been salted away. Here's a quirky detail. Some nobles tried to hide forbidden texts inside walls or bury them in sealed clay jars. Years later, a few would be found intact, like voices trapped in amber, but most never resurfaced. The emperor had been thorough. It doesn't stop with the books. A special clause targets those who dare to discuss the banned histories. The penalty, not a fine, not exile, execution. The first emperor isn't interested in slapping wrists. He's interested in erasing hands. His reasoning, if you can call it that, is that dissenting ideas are like weeds. Pull out the roots, or they grow back. You walk through the scholar districts after the first wave of burnings. The tea houses are quiet. No one leans over low tables to debate the classics anymore. The only whispers are about who might be listening. The air itself feels policed. Even the calligraphers seem to write more cautiously, their brushstrokes smaller, as if afraid that too bold characters might invite scrutiny. One evening, you find yourself in a storeroom piled high with confiscated works waiting for destruction. In the dim light, the titles blur together: treatises on statecraft, the teachings of Confucius, agricultural manuals, poetry collections. You wonder if the emperor has ever read half of what he's burning. Then again, maybe that's the point. If all roads lead to Qin law, then no other map is necessary. Historians still debate whether the emperor personally orchestrated every detail or simply unleashed a bureaucracy already eager to please him. What's certain is the effect the empire's intellectual sky is suddenly much smaller, its horizons walled off. And within those walls, the emperor's words shine brightest because they're the only stars left. As the fires burn night after night, the city seems to grow quieter, or perhaps it's just that the voices willing to speak freely are gone. You think of the young prince you once followed in Zhao the boy, who learned to keep his face unreadable. He's teaching the entire empire to do the same now. On the 7th night of the burnings, you stand at the edge of the square. The firelight dances on the emperor's robes as he watches the last great pile collapse into embers. He doesn't smile, doesn't gloat. His gaze is fixed, as if seeing not the flames, but the blank page they will leave behind. That you realize is his true aim to write his version of history on a canvas scrubbed clean of every other hand. The streets of Xianyang are choked with smoke, and it isn't from some festival firework display. You step outside the palace gates, and the air tastes like scorched parchment. Somewhere deep in the imperial court, Yingzheng, now styling himself as the first emperor of a unified China, has given an order that will erase centuries of thought in a single season, the burning of the books. It begins with a simple decree. Any writings that do not conform to the state-approved legalist ideology are to be confiscated and destroyed. Historians still argue whether this was aimed purely at political dissent, or whether it was a bid to sever the past so completely that no rival vision of China could survive. Either way, you're soon walking past piles of bamboo scrolls stacked like kindling. Here's a quirky tidbit. In those days, books weren't bound the way you know them. Now they were thin bamboo slats strung together with silk cords, rolled or folded for storage. They don't so much burn as they smolder, the cords snapping one by one as the heat rises until the whole bundle collapses in a sigh of ash. In the marketplaces, scholars clutch their sleeves tighter as soldiers push past them, confiscating bundles of texts hidden under cloaks. Some try to argue quoting the classics, but the guards have no interest in debate. A few bribes change hands, but in most cases, the scrolls vanish into wagons bound for the great bonfires. You follow one such wagon to an open square. The fire pit roars, embers popping against the night. An imperial official reads out the list of banned works, histories of the feudal state's poetry from rival traditions' treatises on governance that challenge the legalist model. The crowd shifts uneasily. Somewhere in the mass of faces, you see an old man clutching a tiny bamboo slip. His eyes are fixed on the flames, as though he's staring into the grave of a lifelong friend. Yingzhen does not come to watch the fires himself. Instead, he stays within the palace meeting with ministers to discuss the next phase of the purge, the removal of scholars who dare to challenge the imperial truth. The ministers nod gravely. The emperor's face is impassive, but you've been watching him long enough to sense that under that stillness lies satisfaction. Some try to hide their works. You hear of one eccentric scholar who waterproofs his scrolls with lacquer and buries them inside a clay jar in the hills. Another copies an entire forbidden history from memory, disguising it as a family genealogy. These acts will go unnoticed for now, but centuries later some of those hidden works will be rediscovered like bottled messages washed ashore from a drowned civilization. One afternoon, you walk through the palace archives, the part that remains. The silence is heavy, as if the shelves themselves know they've lost countless companions. Rows of government edicts and legal codes gleam with fresh ink. Gone are the wandering voices of past philosophers, the imaginative verses of poets who dared to dream differently. It's like a garden stripped of all but one species of tree, tidy but eerily uniform. Historians still debate just how many works were destroyed, but you can feel the magnitude in your bones. Every ash flake you see drifting on the wind could have been a line of verse, a treatise on astronomy, a history of kings long forgotten. The scale of erasure is as vast as the empire itself. Here's the unsettling thing to many ordinary citizens: the emperor's decree brings a strange kind of relief. Without conflicting texts, without debates in the marketplace, life feels simpler, quieter. But that quiet is the quiet of an empty stage after the actors have all been dragged away. You sense it's the silence before another, even darker act. Late one evening, as you walk past the palace garden, you overhear two scholars whispering behind a rockery. One says, "They're not just burning words, they're burning memory." The other nods, eyes darting toward the shadows. They fall silent when they notice you. You don't blame them. In this new order, even a careless glance can be dangerous. From the high balcony of the palace, the smoke from a dozen bonfires curls upward, merging into the night sky. Somewhere beyond the city walls, the countryside sleeps, unaware that the very roots of its culture are turning to dust. And in the stillness of his private chambers, the emperor begins to plan the next move, one that will ensure not just the silence of dissent, but its burial. The smoke has barely cleared from the last of the book fires when the next decree falls like a bronze axe. The scholars themselves will now face judgment. In the hushed corridors of the palace, the rumor runs ahead of the official announcement. Certain intellectuals have been accused of sowing discord, questioning the emperor's decisions and clinging to dangerous traditions. You know immediately what this means. If burning the books was about silencing voices, burying the scholars alive is about erasing the bodies that carried them. Historians still argue about the exact number. Some say a few dozen, others hundreds, even 700. But as you follow the procession toward the outskirts of Shanyang, the line of prisoners seems endless. They are bound in pairs, coarse hemp rope cutting into their wrists. You hear one muttering under his breath a passage from the Book of Odes, until a guard smacks him across the face to shut him up. Here's a strange tidbit. Qin executioners carried their own specialized shovels with longer handles and narrower blades than a farmer's tool designed for digging deep, narrow pits quickly. You watch as the ground is broken, the thud of iron on packed earth, the smell of fresh-turned soil mixing with the faint sweetness of spring blossoms overhead. The scholars are herded toward the pits in small groups. Some walk with heads high as though determined to meet death with dignity. Others tremble so badly they can barely keep their footing. You can see in their faces a mix of fear and disbelief, as if they had convinced themselves until this moment that their words might shield them. The emperor does not watch in person. He rarely does when the work is this grim. But you know he is informed of every detail, every name. Somewhere inside the palace, a list is being marked in red ink. One more potential troublemaker removed. Historians still debate whether this purge was driven more by political necessity or personal paranoia. But standing here, you can feel the cruelty coiled tight in the decision. The first bodies are lowered into the pits. There is no ceremony, no last rites. Earth begins to fall, the dull patter soon muffled as it covers faces and chests. You stand very still, the only movement the slow curl of your fingers into your palms. Even the guards work in silence now, as if aware that speaking aloud in such a moment would make the horror too real. Occasionally the digging pauses not out of mercy, but to bring forward the next group. One man refuses to step forward. His legs give way entirely, and he collapses into the grass. Two soldiers drag him by the arms, his feet leaving furrows in the soil. You notice one soldier's expression is blank, almost weary, as though this is just another day's labor. By the time the sun dips low, the ground is a patchwork of fresh mounds. The scent of disturbed earth clings to your clothes. A thin wind rises, rustling through the willow branches nearby, making them sway like mourners. The prisoners' voices are gone now, replaced by the rhythmic scrape of shovels being cleaned blades, striking against each other in a grim chorus. And here's the chilling part: the executions are followed almost immediately by an imperial proclamation praising order and unity. The message is clear, a warning to every official soldier and farmer alike: dissent will not just be silenced, it will be buried. That night you pass through the palace hall, where a banquet is in progress. Courtiers drink warm rice wine and discuss canal projects, as if the day's events were just another entry in the ledger of state business. The music is soft, the laughter polite, and somewhere far beyond these gilded walls, the fresh mounds of earth lie undisturbed under moonlight. As you step outside, you look back toward the silhouette of the palace, its dark roof lines sharp against the sky. You can't help but think of the scholars' bamboo scrolls, now ashes, and their voices now silent. The emperor has made sure that both the words and the people who carried them are gone. And yet, you have the faint, unsettling sense that this is only the beginning. The laws arrive next not as whispered rumors, but carved deep into the very bones of the empire. You walk into the central square of Xianyang to see newly erected stone stelaes gleaming in the sunlight, their surfaces covered in thousands of precise chiseled characters. These are not gentle suggestions. These are commands etched in permanence, each stroke of the chisel, a promise that the emperor's will is unbreakable. You step closer, running your fingers lightly over the grooves. The words speak in the cold, clipped language of legalism, clear obligations, harsher penalties. Steal a sack of grain, death. Speak against the emperor, death. Fail to report your neighbor for suspicious behavior, death. Historians still debate whether such extremity was meant purely to terrify, or whether Qin Shi Huang genuinely believed that only fear could hold a vast, diverse empire together. Here's a quirky tidbit. The carvers sometimes made tiny, deliberate mistakes in the lettering, not because they were sloppy, but to prevent the text from being considered too perfect to touch. An absolutely flawless inscription might be treated like a sacred relic, and the emperor didn't want worship. He wanted obedience. In the countryside, you pass a village where a farmer hunches low over his plough. His hands are cracked, his tunic patched. A traveling official stops to check his household register. Every family must be accounted for, every adult male assigned to military service or labor duty when called. Even in this humble place, the law feels like a pair of invisible hands tightening around every throat. You hear about punishments that border on absurd. A man in the city was executed for chiseling a few characters off an official's stele to reuse the stone in his courtyard wall. A family was forced into penal labor for failing to keep their road frontage free of weeds, which the inspectors deemed neglecting the emperor's order. Historians still argue whether these were genuine examples or tales told to frighten. But either way, the fear they spread was real. The emperor's ministers make certain there is no confusion. Along every major road, on every city gate, smaller wooden boards bear painted versions of the laws for those who cannot travel to see the stone originals. You stand one afternoon at the edge of such a crowd watching a village headman read aloud the penalties for desertion, his voice flat, as if trying to make the words less heavy than they are. The faces listening do not change. They already know the rules are not suggestions. Enforcement is ruthless. The legal code allows for collective punishment. If one man commits a crime, his entire family can be punished alongside him. You meet a weaver whose brother fled conscription. The man's wife and children have been taken to labor camps. His own loom now sits idle, covered in dust. He speaks quietly, eyes on the floor. "'Tis not my guilt, but it is my fate." The emperor, meanwhile, seems entirely unmoved. In council, he praises the system for producing results. Crime rates drop, though whether from genuine reform or sheer terror, no one dares say. Ministers present neat scrolls showing improved tax collection, increased grain shipments, fewer reported uprisings. The numbers please him. In the market one afternoon, a young boy bumps into a soldier, nearly toppling the man's load of supplies. The soldier grabs the boy by the arm, ready to haul him off for questioning. His mother intervenes instantly, bowing low, pressing her forehead to the dirt. You notice she offers the soldier a small pouch of dried apricots, an unspoken plea for mercy. The soldier considers, then lets them go. It is a rare, fleeting moment of humanity in a system that allows so little of it. As the sun sets over Shenyang, the stone steles gleam a deep orange in the fading light. The characters seem almost to pulse their carved lines, casting long, thin shadows like the bars of a cage. You can feel it in the air. The laws are not just rules, they are walls, and the empire is now a vast prison, under an emperor whose cruelty has been set in stone. The new laws are barely dry on the stone when you find yourself traveling along the emperor's latest pride and joy, the Great Qin Road network. It is not just one road, but a vast spiderweb stretching across the empire, linking newly conquered territories to the imperial heart. From a distance, the main trunk road looks like a river of stone cutting through fields and hills. Up close, you see the cost in sweat and blood. You walk beside teams of laborers, their backs glistening under the relentless sun. The roadbed is built in layers packed earth-crushed stone and a top layer of tightly fitted flagstones. It is work that demands endless lifting, hauling, tamping. And for many of these workers, it is not a choice. The emperor has ordered thousands of conscripted peasants, prisoners, and exiled criminals to labor here. Refusal is not an option. Attempt to flee, and you will be hunted down, your family punished with you. Historians still debate whether the emperor saw this as a benevolent gift to his people, a network to speed trade, communication, and defense, or whether he cared only for the military advantage. You suspect the latter, especially after watching a column of Qin soldiers march past in perfect formation, their boots drumming on the fresh stones. The roads make it possible for an army to appear almost anywhere in the empire in a fraction of the time it once took. Here's a quirky tidbit. The roads are so precisely built that the main avenues in Shenyang are said to have been measured to align directly with the North Star, a celestial reminder that the emperor's rule is as constant as the heavens. The symbolism is neat if you ignore the broken backs of those who built them. Along the way, you pass stone markers noting distances not in miles, but in li, the Chinese measure, of roughly a third of a mile. Each marker bears the seal of the emperor, a reminder that even the ground you walk on is claimed by him. Couriers ride fast horses along the road, carrying sealed bamboo tubes of an imperial orders. You watch one gallop past dusk, kicking into your face, his expression grim. The roadwork never seems to end. You spend a day at a canal project linked to the road network, where muddy trenches are being cut through farmland to connect rivers for barge traffic. The workers here are knee-deep in silt, passing wicker baskets of mud hand to hand in a slow, endless chain. The overseers carry whips more for display than actual use. The fear of them is enough to keep the line moving. In the villages along the route, life is unsettled. Farmers are pulled from their fields for weeks or months to work on the emperor's projects, leaving their families to tend the crops alone. You meet an old woman who points to her grandson in the work crew. He should be planting millet, she says, her voice low, so the overseer can't hear. But the emperor says he must plant stones instead. When a section of road is finished, the celebration is minimal. A perfunctory offering of wine to the workers, a speech from a local magistrate praising their loyalty. And then the laborers are sent on to the next stretch, the next hill, to cut the next river to bridge. The empire's appetite for stone seems endless. In the evenings, you sometimes walk the finished roads under a reddening sky. The straightness of them is unnerving. They slice through forests and fields without the gentle curves of older paths. It feels as though the land itself has been forced to obey, reshaped to match the emperor's will, and in a way it has. One night, sitting by a roadside campfire, you hear a group of conscripts muttering about a friend who collapsed from exhaustion and was buried right there under the roadbed. No marker, no mourning, just another layer of stone laid over him. You look down at the smooth flagstones and can't help but wonder how many others rest beneath your feet, swallowed by the emperor's vision of progress. By the time you return to Shanyang, the road crews are already moving toward the mountains, carving new arteries into the empire. The emperor is pleased. His ministers speak of speed, of control, of the unshakable grip. These roads will give the throne. But you have walked them, and you know they are not just roads. They are chains binding the land and its people to Qin forever. The winter wind cuts through your robes as you climb into the northern hills. Word has spread through the empire. The emperor has ordered a wall to be raised across the northern frontier. Not just a fence or a watchpost, a wall so massive it will stand for generations, barring nomadic raiders from ever again sweeping into Qin lands. From the crest of a ridge, you see the line of laborers stretching into the distance, like an unbroken column of ants. They toil in silence, the only sounds the thud of hammers on stone and the whistle of the icy wind. The emperor's decree is clear: the wall must rise quickly, no matter the human cost. And you soon see what "no matter the cost" truly means. Here's a quirky tidbit. Much of what you see now will one day be swallowed up or rebuilt into later versions of the Great Wall. But for the moment, it is raw and primitive tamped earth, rough stone and timber frames. From afar, it already looks imposing. But up close, you see the seams, the rough, joins the layers of compacted soil pressed into place by endless stomping feet. The workers are not skilled masons. Many are peasants torn from their farms, convicts sent here in chains, soldiers punished for minor offences. You walk past one group still in partial shackles. The iron rings around their ankles, rattling with every step. The foreman's whip cracks sharply over their heads, though rarely does it actually strike. The threat is enough. Historians still debate whether the emperor truly believed the wall would be a lasting military defense, or whether it was as much about marking the empire's edge, a visible, monumental statement of power. Watching it snake over the frozen hills, you suspect it is both a fortress and a message carved into the land itself. The work is brutal. Men haul baskets of stone and clay on shoulder poles, their breath steaming in the cold air. You hear coughing in the ranks, wet, rattling coughs that sound like they won't stop until they stop forever. At night, the temperature drops so low that frost forms on the blankets before the workers even fall asleep. One evening, you sit with a group of laborers around a small fire, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. One man tells you about his wife and daughter back in the south. By the time I return, he says, if I return, my daughter will be grown and she will not know me. His words trail into the darkness. No one responds. In this place, sentiment is a weight you can't afford to carry. The emperor does not visit the construction sites himself, but reports reach him daily. If progress slows, punishments are swift. A foreman is demoted for missing a quota. A local magistrate is removed entirely and sent to labor alongside the very men he once commanded. The message is unmistakable. The wall will rise on schedule even if it must be built over the bodies of those who falter. Here's another grim detail. Those who die during construction are sometimes buried within the wall itself. There are no funerals, no prayers, only another layer of stone and earth pressed into place. You touch the wall one evening, and feel the faint warmth from the day's sun still clinging to it. But beneath that surface is the cold permanence of death. The wall consumes everything around it. Trees are felled for scaffolding villages, stripped of supplies oxen worked until they drop. Even the nearby rivers run muddier from the constant churning of soil. And yet, day after day the wall grows higher, its shadow stretching farther across the hills. From a watchtower newly raised along one section, you look northward into the open steppe. The land beyond is vast and empty, the horizon softened by snow. For a moment, you understand the emperor's fear, the raids that can come like storms, swift and devastating. But then you remember the faces of the men hauling stone until their backs give out, and you wonder if this wall is really meant to keep invaders out, or to keep his own people in line. When you finally descend from the hills back toward the heart of the empire, the sound of the work stays with you, the endless rhythm of hammers, shovels, and boots stamping earth. The Great Wall of Qin is still far from complete, but already it stands as a monument to the emperor's will and to the cruelty that fuels it. You return to Xianyang to find the city humming with a different kind of ambition. Rumors have been trickling in for months, and now you see them taking shape. The Apang Palace, a sprawling complex that will make every hall, garden and chamber in the known world look like a village hut by comparison. The emperor, apparently unsatisfied with merely ruling all of China, has decided he needs a seat of power worthy of the gods themselves. The site stretches for miles. You stand on a hill at dawn and watch the sun rise over a sea of scaffolding wooden cranes and the ant-like movement of thousands of laborers. Foremen bark orders. Oxen haul massive timber beams. Masons chip at limestone blocks, sending sparks and shards into the morning air. The plans call for pavilions, reception halls, courtyards, banquet spaces, gardens with artificial hills, and enough private chambers to house a retinue larger than many towns. Historians still argue whether the palace's true purpose was governance showmanship or simply a monument to imperial ego. Judging by the gold leaf designs you see sketched on wooden tablets, you're leaning toward ego. The emperor envisions not just a seat of state, but a wonder of the world, something so magnificent that no subject or foreign envoy could look upon it without feeling small. Here's a quirky tidbit. The palace's main hall, according to the plans, will be so vast that it could reportedly seat 10,000 people at once. Whether that figure is exact or poetic exaggeration hardly matters. What matters is that everyone in Qin will believe it. The human cost is staggering. The labor force includes convicts, conscripts, artisans, and captured enemies from the recent wars. You walk through the workers' encampments and smell the mingling of boiling millet gruel, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. Many live in makeshift shelters of reed mats and scrap timber, sleeping shoulder to shoulder. You overhear a mason muttering that the palace will take 100 years to finish. His companion laughs bitterly. "It will take our lives first," he says, "and still be unfinished when we're bones." In truth, the pace of work is relentless. Overseers push the crews from dawn until moonrise, and anyone who collapses is carried away without ceremony. At the heart of the construction site stands the emperor's vision, in miniature, a scaled model of the entire palace complex, crafted in fine wood and painted in bright colors. The emperor visits this model, often moving tiny figurines to indicate adjustments. Once you see him pick up a miniature tower and set it farther from the main hall. No explanation, no consultation, just a shift in his mind, which instantly becomes a shift in reality. The project draws in the finest artisans in the empire. You watch a team of lacquer workers polish massive door panels until they shine like black glass, their reflections catching the sunrise. Bronze casters pour molten metal into molds shaped for dragon-headed roof finials. A group of carpenters fit together vast roof beams without a single nail, relying on complex joinery perfected over generations. Yet amid this artistry, you can't escape the grim undercurrent. The same hands that carve delicate lattice work for a palace window also dig graves for exhausted comrades. The same carts that deliver fragrant cedar planks carry away the bodies of workers who succumb to injury or disease. Historians still debate whether the Epung Palace was ever truly finished before the Qin dynasty's collapse. Some say it stood in dazzling splendor for a few brief years. Others believe much of it remained incomplete, its promise as vast and empty as its courtyards. Standing here now, you believe it's entirely possible for both to be true, that parts of it rose to magnificent reality, while others existed only in the emperor's dreams. In the evenings, the construction site glows with hundreds of oil lamps. The sound of saws, chisels, and hammers softens into a distant hum. From a balcony overlooking the site, the emperor gazes at his palace in progress, arms folded, the faintest smile playing at his lips. It is the smile of a man who believes he is building not just a home, but a destiny carved in woodstone and the sweat of countless nameless souls. And in that smile, you see again the pattern you've come to recognize. Every triumph of Qin is built not only on ambition, but on cruelty. The palace may one day be the jewel of the empire, but tonight it is a jewel forged in human suffering. The palace walls are still echoing with the hammering of carpenters when the emperor's attention begins to wander elsewhere. It's not that his appetite for grandeur is sated, far from it. It's that another far older hunger begins gnawing at him, the fear of death. You first hear it as a murmur in the corridors, a discreet question posed to an alchemist, a veiled order for envoys to seek rare substances. Soon, the whispers take clearer shape. The emperor has begun a quest for immortality. Not metaphorical immortality in the form of monuments and legacies, but actual physical, never die, live forever immortality. Historians still argue whether this obsession sprang purely from paranoia, or whether it was stoked by the era's fascination with Taoist mysticism. Either way, the emperor treats it as seriously as a military campaign. Messengers are dispatched to the coast with orders to find the mythical islands of the immortals said to float far beyond the eastern seas. You hear talk of a place called Penglai, where ancient sages live in perpetual youth, sustained by magical herbs and spring water. Here's a quirky tidbit. One record describes the emperor commissioning a fleet of ships to carry hundreds of young men and women, supposedly as companions for the immortals they were to meet. Imagine that, a matchmaking service for the undying. The preparations are elaborate. You watch from the docks as ships are loaded with barrels of rice wine, dried fish, lacquered chests of tools, and delicate ceramic jars meant to carry back the precious elixirs. The sea captains look uneasy, knowing the voyage is as much guesswork as navigation. The emperor, however, is convinced. In private, he confides to his closest attendants that the elixirs will not only grant him eternal life, but ensure the eternal stability of his empire. Back in the capital, the search extends inland as well. Alchemists in long robes shuffle into the palace gardens, scattering powders into bubbling cauldrons, their concoctions filling the air with sharp metallic scents. One man claims to have distilled the essence of cinnabar red mercury ore into a drinkable form that will transform the bones and flesh. You see the emperor take the goblet in both hands, his eyes alight with anticipation. The irony is thick enough to cut with a bronze blade. Historians still debate whether these so-called elixirs were believed safe, or whether the emperor ignored their dangers. You notice his complexion beginning to change over the months, a waxy pallor, a faint tremor in his fingers. But his faith never wavers. Envoys return from the coast with elaborate excuses. They claim storms drove them back, or that sea monsters barred their way, or that the islands vanished into mist before they could land. None return with the immortality herbs, but all insist they were close, so very close. The emperor listens without visible disappointment. Instead, he doubles the reward for success, as if throwing silver at the sea might coax eternity from its depths. Meanwhile, the palace fills with strange gifts, from distant lands carved jade charms to strengthen the spirit bundles of rare ginseng roots, as twisted as old men's hands, scrolls of diagrams showing the flow of qi through the body. The emperor keeps them all, arranging them in a special hall devoted to his longevity studies. You step inside one afternoon and feel as though you've wandered into a museum of desperation, glittering trinkets, ancient bones, jars of dried fungi labeled in careful calligraphy. At night, he sometimes summons his trusted healers to his private chamber. You're present once when an alchemist kneels before him, presenting a vial of cloudy liquid. The emperor drinks without hesitation. You notice the faint metallic smell that clings to the cup afterward and think, if this is life everlasting, it smells a lot like poison. Yet he seems more animated after each attempt, pacing his chambers with renewed energy, speaking of his vision for a 1,000-year dynasty. To his mind, death is merely a problem waiting for the right solution, and solutions are what emperors command. But in the quieter corners of the palace, servants exchange worried glances. Some have noticed the emperor's sudden outbursts of temper, his sleepless nights, his tendency to repeat himself. You hear the chief physician murmur to another, "Immortality is killing him." Still, the search continues. Fleets are sent again. Caravans ride out into distant mountains, and the palace cauldrons bubble day and night. The emperor's gaze is fixed beyond the horizon, chasing a dream that glitters like gold dust in sunlight, beautiful perhaps, but impossible to hold. The palace feels different now, not quieter, but charged with a strange, restless energy. Servants move faster, healers visit more often, and yet the emperor's face, once a study in calculated stillness, now twitches faintly when he thinks no one is watching. You follow him through the inner gardens and see how his steps falter on the stone paths, though he forces his stride to remain firm whenever attendants are near. The cause is no mystery. You've watched him drink from too many porcelain cups filled with the shimmering metallic brews prepared by his alchemists. The elixirs of immortality are rich in mercury and other lethal minerals, their glitter masking their danger. Historians still argue whether he ever knew their harm, whether he believed the dizziness, stomach pains and mood swings were simply the body's way of adjusting to eternal life. One evening, as the sun falls behind the palace walls, he summons a favored alchemist to his private chamber. You're there when the man unrolls a silk packet to reveal brilliant red powder cinnabar ground so fine it seems to glow in the lamplight. The alchemist claims it is life's essence distilled from the bones of the earth. The emperor smiles faintly, the lines at the corners of his mouth deepening, and orders the preparation mixed with wine. The taste makes him shudder, but he drinks every drop. Here's a quirky tidbit in Qin court superstition. It was believed that mercury could mimic the properties of quicksilver in the body, flowing freely, never stagnating, and thus never allowing the soul to settle into death. Standing here now, you can see how that image might have captivated a mind desperate to cheat mortality. In the weeks that follow, his behavior grows erratic. One day he's riding through the city gates in full ceremonial armor, smiling and tossing coins to the crowd. The next, he's sequestered in his chamber, snapping at ministers and refusing audiences. His once impeccable calligraphy becomes uneven strokes, jagged and rushed. The court physicians prescribe balancing remedies, teas of ginseng and goji berries, steamed with fragrant lotus seeds. But these gentle cures are drowned out by the daily doses of mercury and jade powder. You notice his hands trembling slightly as he signs an imperial edict, his fingers leaving smudges of ink. Rumors creep through the palace like smoke. A maid whispers that she saw the emperor speaking to himself in an empty corridor, gesturing as though addressing unseen guests. A guard claims the emperor ordered a patrol to escort him to an audience hall in the middle of the night, only to find the hall deserted. Historians still debate whether these were signs of poisoning, or simply the weight of paranoia pressing harder on his mind. And yet for all this his ambition does not slacken. He calls for updated maps of the empire studies, reports from the borders, demands new inspection tours of the Great Wall and the road networks. He speaks often now of tidying the empire before his great transformation, as though immortality will require a perfect stage. One morning you ride out with him on a short journey beyond the city walls. The countryside glows with spring green, but the emperor is pale beneath his ceremonial hat. He complains of a strange heat in his chest, though the air is still cool. At a rest stop, he pours himself water from a bronze flask, but drinks only a mouthful before discarding it in favor of yet another elixir brought by his attendants. That night, you pass his chamber and hear him pacing long after the lamps should have been extinguished. His steps are uneven, his breathing loud. You imagine the mercury moving through his veins like liquid fire, beautiful and lethal, reshaping not just his body, but his mind. Still, the courtiers bow deeply in his presence, and the ministers speak of his boundless energy in public. No one dares suggest that the quest for immortality is eroding the emperor from within. And so day after day, he continues to drink, to dream, and to believe, convinced that every swallow brings him closer to eternity, even as each one pulls him another step toward his end. The palace whispers now of a project so vast and secretive that even high-ranking ministers speak of it only in low tones. It is the emperor's final insurance against death, a city beneath the earth, a tomb fit not just for a man, but for the ruler of all under heaven. You find yourself standing on the outskirts of Xianyang, where the land is alive with movement. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of laborers swarm over an expanse of fields, sinking into the earth like ants, disappearing into a nest. The entrances to the work are heavily guarded. Each slope leading underground is flanked by soldiers in lacquered armor, their spears crossed before them. You slip closer, catching the smell of damp clay and lamp oil drifting upward. The emperor's decree is absolute. The tomb must be ready long before his final breath. Historians still argue about when construction began. Some say it started the moment he unified China. Others claim it began even earlier, when he was still a king of Qin. What is certain is the sheer ambition. The underground palace will mirror the capital itself, complete with halls, courtyards, and stables. The emperor's bedchamber will be surrounded by treasures, art, and all the luxuries he enjoyed in life. But this is not just a monument. It is a fortress. The dead emperor will be guarded as securely as the living one. Here's a quirky tidbit worker's cart in mercury by the jarful, pouring it into channels that trace rivers and seas across the tomb floor. The idea is to replicate China's geography in shimmering liquid metal with the imperial chamber at its center. You can almost picture it, a map of the empire gleaming in perpetual darkness, toxic and magnificent. The deeper you descend, the more the air thickens. Wooden scaffolding holds up raw earthen walls, and tunnels lead into chambers where artisans work by the flicker of oil lamps. Bronze smiths hammer fittings for chariots. Potters shape tiles for miniature palace roofs. Jewelers set gemstones into ornaments destined never to see sunlight. One vast chamber is reserved for the emperor's army, not of flesh and blood, but of clay. Row upon row of terracotta warriors stand in partial completion, their torsos upright but missing arms or heads waiting to be painted. Each face is distinct sculpted from a real soldier's likeness. You watch a craftsman press a clay mustache onto a freshly molded head, his hands steady despite the damp chill. Historians still debate whether these figures were meant to be purely symbolic or to serve as spiritual guardians in the afterlife. The work is relentless. Supplies arrive daily: timber from distant forests, stone from far quarries, lacquer and pigments from every corner of the empire. Entire teams labor solely on the underground stables, where terracotta horses will stand, bridled and ready. Others dig storage pits for weapons, real bronze swords and crossbows sharpened and battle-ready even in death. The cost in lives is staggering. Conscripted peasants vanish into the tomb works and never return to their villages. Some die from cave-ins or accidents. Others simply disappear. You hear the rumors whispered in the dark corners of inns that workers who finish certain sections are sealed inside to protect the tomb's secrets. Historians still argue whether this is fact or legend, but as you watch the guarded entrances, you find it disturbingly plausible. Even the planning is wrapped in secrecy. Scrolls with the tomb's layout are locked in the emperor's private archives, and only a handful of overseers know the entire design. The laborers see only their piece of the puzzle, unaware of how it all fits together. But from your vantage point, you can sense the whole a subterranean empire for a man who cannot bear to imagine his reign ending. At dusk, the work continues. The glow from the entrances spills into the fields, the flickering light, like the breath of some vast sleeping beast. You can almost believe the tomb is alive, growing and shaping itself in anticipation of the day it will be sealed forever. Above ground, the emperor walks his garden seemingly untroubled. But you know, and he knows, that every step he takes is echoed far below in the city of clay and stone that waits to claim him. The cruelty of it is as plain as the ambition thousands will die so that one man may pretend even in death to live forever. The work on the underground palace moves steadily toward completion, but it's the outermost chamber that captures your attention, the army. You descend into a newly excavated corridor and see them row after row of terracotta warriors, standing in perfect formation as if awaiting a signal to march. Even in the flicker of oil lamps, their faces seem alive. Each soldier is different. One has high cheekbones and a narrow jaw. Another's nose is broad, his lips pressed into a tight line. Some wear stern expressions, others faint smiles, but none look identical. Historians still marvel at this, an entire army where every face is unique, as if the emperor had demanded that each one be a portrait of a real man who once served him. Here's a quirky tidbit. The warriors were once painted in bright colors: red tunics, blue trousers, black armor, with intricate patterns picked out in green and white. But the moment they were unearthed in later centuries, the paint flaked away in seconds, leaving the familiar dull clay you see today. You walk slowly down the central aisle, flanked by soldiers on either side. Some grip spears, others bows or swords. Their armor is detailed to the last rivet, every knot of their belts carefully sculpted. The air smells faintly of clay and lacquer, the dampness of the earth clinging to your robes. In one pit, the warriors are joined by chariots and horses also made of terracotta, their ears pricked forward, muscles caught in mid-strain. Craftsmen work nearby attaching reins and painting bridle straps, their hands moving with the precision of surgeons. You watch one carefully glue a bronze blade into a clay hand, the point catching the lamplight with a metallic glint. Historians still debate whether this army was meant to fight in the afterlife or simply stand as a symbolic guard. But when you stand here surrounded by hundreds of silent, watchful faces, it's easy to believe they could spring to life if the emperor willed it. And yet, there's a deeper cruelty beneath the artistry. Many of the craftsmen you see here will not leave once their work is done. Rumors among the laborers suggest that entire teams vanish after completing sections, their absence explained away as transfer to another site. You notice the sidelong glances between workers, the sudden silences when overseers draw near. One evening, you linger near a partially finished row. A young sculptor wipes sweat from his brow and whispers that he modeled the face of his favorite warrior after his brother, who died on the northern frontier. This way, he says quietly, he'll stand forever. His eyes are bright, but you can't tell if the brightness is pride, grief, or both. The scale is staggering. Even the pits already filled with soldiers seem only a fraction of the whole. New chambers are constantly being dug, more warriors molded, fired, and positioned. It's as though the emperor fears that death will bring him a war greater than any he fought in life, and he intends to be ready. You climb to an overlook and gaze down on the entire formation. The soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, their ranks receding into shadow. In the quiet, you can almost hear the rustle of armor, the creak of bowstrings, the low murmur of men waiting for the order to move. It's an army frozen in the moment before battle, held in suspension until eternity calls. Above ground, the emperor never speaks of them directly. To him, they are just another tool, another measure of control over a world he refuses to relinquish. But you know better. You've seen the hours poured into each face, the quiet pride and quiet fear in the craftsman's eyes. This army is more than clay. It's a final desperate act of possession. And when the tomb is sealed, they will remain here, keeping their eternal watch in darkness, their loyalty written not in blood, but in fired earth. A loyalty the emperor demands even beyond the grave. The emperor's obsessions have always been visible in stone lore and blood, but now you see them sinking deep into his mind like roots splitting rock. His paranoia no longer lurks quietly in the corners, it walks beside him in daylight. Every audience hall feels colder, every shadow longer. He moves through the palace as if the walls themselves might conceal assassins. Historians still argue whether this paranoia was born in his childhood captivity, or whether it's the natural result of ruling an empire by fear. Either way, it now shapes every decision he makes. Ministers are summoned in pairs so they can watch each other as much as they watch him. Messages are sent along 3 different couriers to ensure none are altered or intercepted. Even the royal kitchens are ordered to prepare identical meals in separate locations in case one is poisoned. Here's a quirky tidbit. The emperor begins to travel with a set of identical carriages all painted and decorated exactly alike. When he leaves the palace, the convoy fans out in different directions, making it impossible for a would-be assassin to know which carriage holds him. Watching from a high terrace one morning, you see the decoys roll away, like a strange mechanical insect scattering across the roads. His journeys grow stranger. He no longer sleeps in the same bed 2 nights in a row, even within the palace. In the countryside, he changes lodgings without warning sometimes in the middle of the night, moving by torchlight to avoid being tracked. You find yourself trudging after him through misty lanes at hours when the crickets are the only ones awake. The imperial guards have grown into a small army of their own tall men, in lacquered armor hand-picked for loyalty and kept under constant watch themselves. They patrol the palace corridors in pairs, their boots clicking on the polished stone floors. More than once you catch them inspecting the underside of chairs or the seams of wall hangings for hidden blades. Historians still debate whether any actual assassination plots were active in these later years, but the emperor behaves as if danger is certain and everywhere. Ministers who linger too long in private conversation find themselves reassigned to distant provinces. Courtiers who show unusual interest in palace routines suddenly vanish from the banquet tables. One afternoon, you pass him in the garden as he studies a carp pond. His gaze fixes on the fish swirling beneath the lotus leaves. Without turning to you, he says, "The fish that swims too close to the surface invites the heron's beak." His voice is calm, but the meaning is clear. Visibility is danger. The fear extends even to his family. Relatives of the emperor's blood are kept at a remove, their visits carefully timed and supervised. A cousin who speaks too freely about court politics finds himself invited to inspect a remote border garrison indefinitely. The emperor trusts no one completely, not even the people who share his lineage. In public ceremonies, he wears an expression carved from jade, smiling only at the appointed moments. But when the crowd's roar fades, you sometimes catch a flicker of his eyes scanning the balconies, the rooftops, the faces at the edge of the throng. Even in triumph, he looks hunted. One night, while the court sleeps, he orders a torchlit inspection of the city walls. You trail behind as he moves from gate to gate, quizzing guards, testing locks, peering into the darkness beyond the ramparts. At the eastern gate, he pauses a long time, staring into the fields. You can feel the weight of his gaze, not just seeing the night, but imagining what might be moving within it. The cruelty that once drove him to conquer and command now turns inward, shaping a fortress of fear around his own life. He is both the jailer and the prisoner locked in an empire of his own making, guarded not just by soldiers, but by the endless vigilance of a man who believes that every shadow has teeth. The summer heat clings heavy to the air as the imperial convoy rolls out of Xianyang. Dust rises from the road in slow, lazy curls, catching the sunlight like pale smoke. At the heart of it all rides the emperor, cloaked and veiled, hidden behind the curtains of his carriage. Even now, no one can be certain which of the identical carriages he's in. The convoy moves with deliberate slowness, as if the journey is less about distance than about keeping people guessing. Historians still argue over the purpose of this trip. Some say it was a routine inspection of the empire's far reaches. Others believe it was yet another attempt to find rare herbs or alchemical wonders to stave off death. You, walking alongside the creak of wooden wheels, suspect it is both part political theatre, part pilgrimage for immortality. The heat brings a strange stillness to the procession. Soldiers ride with their eyes narrowed against the glare hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The road runs straight through the heart of the countryside, past fields of ripening millet, past villages whose people kneel at the roadside as the emperor's banners flutter by. The air smells of baked earth and horse sweat. At midday, the convoy halts in a grove of old cypresses for a meal. Here's a quirky tidbit. The emperor travels with multiple kitchens, each preparing the same dishes in different places to avoid the risk of poisoning. The cooks work silently under the watchful eyes of the guards, chopping melons, steaming rice, roasting strips of marinated pork. Every dish is tasted first by an appointed food taster, before it is placed before the emperor's sealed carriage. By the third day, there's a shift. The emperor's appearances outside the carriage grow less frequent. At the early stops, he had stepped out briefly to stretch his legs, to offer a perfunctory blessing to local officials. Now the curtains stay drawn. You overhear a captain of the guard telling another that His Majesty has been troubled by the heat, though his tone suggests the explanation is not entirely convincing. One evening, as the convoy makes camp near the banks of the Yellow River, you're summoned quietly to the rear. There, in the glow of a few guarded lanterns, the Emperor's chief physician slips inside the main carriage. You wait, feeling the soft hiss of the river's current in the dark. When the physician emerges, his expression is carefully blank, but you catch the faintest tightening of the corner of his mouth. The kind of expression a man wears when he's just delivered news no one wants to hear aloud. The following morning, the pace slows. The convoy takes longer breaks, the horses are watered more often, and the guards shift uneasily in their saddles. Historians still debate whether the emperor's health was already in steep decline before leaving Shenyang, or whether the road and the summer heat worsened it. Either way, the signs are clear to you now. His immortal quest is losing ground to the very mortality he fears. On the fifth day, the procession reaches a bustling town. Ordinarily, the emperor would be greeted by local magistrates and an arranged crowd. This time, the official welcome is cancelled at the last moment. You hear whispers among the aides the emperor is resting and will not appear. A thin man in court robes steps forward instead, delivering the prepared imperial speech in a steady voice. That night, as the camp sleeps, the emperor's carriage is quietly moved to a more secluded position near the edge of the grove. Guards are doubled, and a ring of sentries stands with their backs to the trees facing outward. You recognize this for what it is, an attempt to keep the truth from leaking beyond the immediate circle. The journey is no longer about inspection or tribute. It is about containing the emperor's decline. Still, the convoy presses onward. The drums beat in time with the horses' hooves. The banners ripple in the warm breeze. And somewhere behind those heavy curtains, the man who once ruled an empire without fear now wrestles with the one enemy he cannot command. The air inside the convoy is heavy now, not just with summer heat, but with the weight of unspoken truth. You can feel it in the way the guards avoid meeting each other's eyes, in the hushed tone of the senior ministers who ride close to the emperor's carriage. Word has not been spoken aloud, yet you know the emperor is failing. Historians still argue exactly when he died. Some claim it happened suddenly. Others insist it was a slow fading over many days. But as you watch the convoy crawl along the dusty road, you see the signs as clearly as the banners overhead. The curtains of his carriage remain tightly drawn. The only movements behind them are the occasional shifting shadow and the faint rustle of attendants within. Here's a strange tidbit. Qin custom held that the body of a ruler must not be displayed until all arrangements for succession and security were in place. To do otherwise invited chaos, and so, when the moment comes, whether on the road, near Pingyuan, or a few days beyond, there is no public wail, no sudden halt. Only a subtle tightening of the formation, and a quiet meeting among the emperor's most trusted men. From that moment, the convoy changes. Orders are given in clipped whispers. The pace slows to a crawl, not from fatigue but from caution. If word of the emperor's death reaches the wrong ears too soon, rebellion could ignite before they even reach the capital. And so, the great fiction begins. The emperor lives, until they say otherwise. To maintain the illusion, attendants continue to bring food to the imperial carriage, carrying trays covered in embroidered cloths. The dishes are returned later untouched, but no one comments. Ministers receive sealed messages from the carriage written in the emperor's distinctive hand, though you can tell they are forged by his close aides. At night, the carriage is parked in the center of camp, as usual, guarded like a fortress. But there is one problem. They cannot entirely hide the smell. Summer is unforgiving, and the heat inside the sealed carriage turns it into a slow, grim crucible. The attendants bring more incense burners, their sweet resinous smoke curling into the night air. Even so, you catch a faint, unmistakable odor when you walk too close. Historians still debate one of the strangest measures taken, the decision to load the carriage with carts of salted fish, travelling close behind. Officially, they are provisions for the journey. Unofficially, they help mask the smell of decay, a trick both practical and macabre. You've seen strange disguises before, but this one lingers in your memory. The mingling of incense salt and the sharp, sweet rot of fish following the emperor like a spectral perfume. The guards, to their credit, play their parts perfectly. When villagers line the roadside, they call out that the Son of Heaven is resting and will not appear today. When local officials try to approach, they are politely told that His Majesty is occupied with state matters and must not be disturbed. The fiction holds, if just barely. At night, you walk among the campfires and hear the murmurs. Some soldiers suspect the truth but keep silent. Others have convinced themselves the emperor still breathes, that the rumors are just the usual camp gossip. Denial, it seems, can be as strong as loyalty, and so the convoy presses on each mile, a strange blend of solemn procession and stage play. The emperor's final journey is not yet toward his tomb, not officially. First, he must return to Xianyang alive, so that the machinery of succession can turn without a hitch. You realize that even in death he commands the same fear, the same rigid control as in life. No one dares break the script, and somewhere behind those drawn curtains, the man who built walls, burned books, buried scholars, and dreamed of living forever is now as silent and still as the clay army, waiting for him beneath the earth. The convoy crawls toward the capital like a shadow moving over the land, heavy with a secret the entire empire must not yet know. In the countryside, farmers pause mid-swing in their fields to watch the long line of banners, unaware that the man they bow toward is no longer breathing. Every village along the route offers tribute baskets of millet jugs of wine, all received with solemn nods by ministers who make polite excuses for the emperor's absence. Historians still argue whether the plan to conceal his death was an act of political genius or a dangerous gamble. You can see both sides. Without a living emperor at the helm, even for a moment, cracks could appear in the empire's stone-tight control. But holding up the illusion requires an elaborate dance. One misstep, and the whole thing collapses. The fish carts follow faithfully behind the imperial carriage, their salty cargo mingling with the thick waves of incense. Some days, the air is so heavy, you have to breathe through your sleeve. And yet, the pretense holds. Officials still kneel at roadside pavilions, reading out memorials, as though the emperor can hear them. They pause for an imagined reply, then bow deeply as the convoy moves on. Here's a strange tidbit. The forged messages from the travelling emperor become almost a style of their own. You notice the handwriting growing more cramped and hurried, perhaps, from the forger's nerves, but the tone remains unmistakably imperial, crisp, authoritative, and faintly disdainful. Behind the curtain of ritual, the real work is happening in hushed conversations between the Prime Minister Zhao Gao and the chief eunuchs. They know they have to decide who will take the throne, and quickly. The emperor had favoured one son Fusu, known for being upright and perhaps too willing to speak against his father's harsher policies. But Zhao Gao and his allies have other ideas. They whisper of Hu Hai, a younger, more pliable son, who will be easier to control. At night, the fires in the central camp burn later than usual. Shadows of men lean close over scrolls, their voices low and urgent. You walk past and catch snatches of conversation. Cannot be allowed to return yet. The edict must appear genuine. No hesitation. You understand they are forging the emperor's final command. Historians still debate the exact wording, but the effect is chilling. An imperial order sent ahead to Fusu. at the frontier commanding him to take his own life. This clears the way for Hu Hai's succession. The dead emperor's voice is made to condemn his own heir. The convoy inches closer to Qianyang. The city, unaware of the truth, prepares for a ceremonial welcome. Banners are sewn, musicians rehearse, courtiers polish speeches meant to flatter a living ruler. You watch from the road as the walls of the capital rise from the haze, the towers catching the late summer light. The plan is seamless now. The emperor will be declared alive until the moment his body is carried into the palace. Only then will the death be announced, followed immediately by the enthronement of the new ruler. There will be no pause, no interregnum, just the appearance of smooth continuity, as if the empire never took a single breath without its sovereign. And yet, as you pass through the city gates with the convoy, you feel the weight of the lie pressing on the stones themselves. The people cheer, bowing low, raising their hands in reverence toward the veiled carriage. You can't help but glance at it, knowing the man inside can neither see nor hear them. That night the gates of the palace close behind you. The convoy dissolves into darkness, the last banners furled. Ministers and guards vanish into the inner court, taking the secret with them. By morning the announcement will be made, the morning begun, the new emperor seated on the dragon throne. And somewhere deep beneath the palace, preparations will begin to carry the first emperor of China to the vast tomb that has been waiting for him all these years, a city of silence that will keep him company forever. The morning banners rise over Xianyang before dawn, long strips of white silk fluttering in the pale morning light. At the first sound of the drum, the city wakes to the news: the first emperor of Qin is dead. The announcement ripples outward like a stone thrown into still water. Cries of grief, real or rehearsed, echo through the streets. Merchants close their stalls, soldiers lower their banners, and the people kneel in the dust, heads bowed. Historians still argue whether the grief was genuine or simply the result of a lifetime under fear and discipline. For many, the emperor's rule had brought order where there had been chaos, but it had also brought crushing taxes, forced labor, and punishments so severe that a wrong word could end a life. Mourning him was as much a matter of survival as of sentiment. Inside the palace, the rituals unfold with precise choreography. The body is laid in state within a great hall, draped in black and white silk, the scent of incense thick in the air. Court musicians play slow, plaintive notes on zithers and flutes, each phrase trailing into silence. The sound carries into the courtyards, where officials kneel in orderly rows, their sobs oddly uniform as if conducted. Here's a quirky tidbit: mourners are required to wear coarse hemp robes and bind their hair with plain cords. Even high ministers must forgo their usual finery. In theory, it is to show humility before the loss of the Son of Heaven. In practice, it makes the court look like a field of grey-bowed reeds. The succession moves swiftly. Hu Hai, the pliable son, chosen by Zhao Gao, and the ministers, takes the throne without challenge. He stands before the assembled court, his voice trembling, as he vows to honor the ways of my august father. You can almost feel the words being fed to him, line by line, by the men who now hold the true reins of power. Meanwhile, the emperor's body is prepared for its final journey. Courtiers and guards line the processional road as the funeral convoy leaves the palace. The coffin, massive and lacquered in deep black, rests on a carriage drawn by teams of horses draped in white. Incense braziers smoke at each corner, their sweet haze softening the sharp sunlight. The road to the tomb is lined with offerings, lacquered chests of treasures, jade ornaments, rare animals in cages, and carts stacked with weapons. The idea is to send the emperor into the afterlife with everything he might need: wealth, protection, even entertainment. You know that much of it will never be seen again, swallowed by the earth with him. When the convoy reaches the burial mound, the sight is staggering. The great earthen pyramid rises from the plain, like a man-made mountain, its flanks studded with fresh-cut turf. Below it yawns the entrance to the subterranean palace, the corridors lined with torches that flicker in the damp air. The body is borne down into the depths, past chambers filled with treasures and the endless ranks of the terracotta army. The air grows cooler, the walls close in. You can almost hear the silence of the centuries waiting to fall upon this place. Historians still debate the final darkest step, whether the artisans and labourers who knew the tomb's secrets were indeed sealed inside with it. The records are silent, but as the last of the living emerge and the great stone doors grind shut, you feel a shiver run through you. It is not hard to imagine voices swallowed by that darkness. The mound above is sealed. The braziers are extinguished one by one. A final layer of earth is laid grass planted, and the tomb becomes just another hill on the horizon, except that you know it is no hill, but an empire buried in miniature. The first emperor lies in his underground city, surrounded by his clay legions, his rivers of mercury, his treasures and weapons. In life he ruled with an iron hand. In death, he has built himself a kingdom that no one can ever leave. His cruelty is now carved into the land, his will pressed into stone and fired clay. And though his body will turn to dust like any other man's, the shadow of his rule will linger for thousands of years. And now, the story quiets. The noise of armies, the clamour of the court, the endless commands of the emperor fade into the distance. You are left standing in the stillness beyond the burial mound, the grass whispering in the evening breeze. The sun dips low, gilding the earth with the softest gold, and the sky deepens into the calm blues of approaching night. The air is cooler here. It carries no hint of fire or dust, only the clean scent of open fields after a long day. Your steps slow, your shoulders ease, and you find yourself breathing in a little deeper, exhaling a little longer. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the gentle call of a night bird, a reminder that life in all its quiet resilience goes on. The emperor's ambitions lie locked in the dark earth now, as unreachable as the stars. The walls he built, the armies he commanded, the laws he carved in stone, they belong to the past. Up here, under the wide open sky, none of that weight can touch you. You are free to wander the grass, to follow the rustle of leaves, to let the long shadows stretch peacefully before you. Imagine the fields empty of soldiers, the roads no longer burdened by endless labour. Picture the Great Wall, as it is centuries later, softened by moss and wildflowers, its stones warmed by the sun. Even the fiercest works of power are humbled in time, worn gentle by wind rain and quiet days. You pause at the crest of a small hill. The horizon is a soft blur, the colours melting into one another as the light fades. You take one last deep breath, letting go of the heavy echoes of the story you've heard. Feel the ground beneath you, solid, steady, holding you safely. Above, the first stars are appearing patient and bright. And as you stand there in the quiet, you realize you've carried the story as far as it needs to go tonight. You can set it down now. Let it drift away like smoke into the dark and follow sleep wherever it wishes to take you.